Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the FAA's Inclusive Language Summit. This meeting is live streamed on the FAA's YouTube and Facebook channels. I'm Abby Smith, FAA's Executive Director for Aviation Policy and Plans. I've been in federal service for nearly 31 years now, starting as an air traffic controller, serving the NTSB as an accident investigator, helping set up the Air Traffic Organizational's Regional Safety Management System, directing the development of our nation's instrument flight procedures, and most recently, directing the training of our nation's air traffic controllers, technicians, and engineers. Aviation and aerospace is in my blood, and how we evolve for the future is deeply important to me. The purpose of today's summit is to inform the public about the FAA's agency-wide initiative to adopt language that is both gender neutral and inclusive. FAA and industry representatives will share recommendations they received that support the use of inclusive language at the agency and across the aerospace community. After all, words matter. Summit attendees will have the opportunity to comment on these recommendations and provide additional input to the FAA. If you would like to submit questions during the summit, I encourage you to do so, and please do so via the Google link, the Google Doc linked in the comment section. We'll answer as many of your questions as time permits. So let's get started. We're honored to have FAA Deputy Administrator Brad Mims here to launch this summit. Deputy Administrator Mims, welcome and thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Well, thank you, Abby, and it's good to see you and good to see everyone who's participating today. And as all of you know, the FAA's mission is to provide the safest, most efficient aerospace system in the world. And we know that a diverse workforce helps us fulfill that mission. Now, diversity enables us to make better decisions, innovate at faster rates, and solve problems sooner. That's why, as Deputy Administrator, one of my priorities is to strengthen diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility at the FAA and throughout the aerospace industry. We know, as Abby said, that language makes a difference. The language we use can include or exclude members of our community, include or exclude members of our community. Now, just think about it. When we use the term or terms like airmen, unmanned aircraft, we are sending a message that only men belong in the aerospace community. That's change. It's going to continue to change because we're going to change this language here. No one believes that, but we're still using this old language, and it's got to change. It's not only inaccurate, but it works to exclude others from feeling welcome in the field. And because of the language that many communities use, too often some groups are left out, such as women, minorities, the LGBTQ community, people with disabilities, and people from underserved communities. So we want to welcome all people. We want to uplift all people. In support of that goal, the FAA is considering recommendations to adopt language that is gender neutral and inclusive, and to promote the use of that language throughout the aerospace field. Our efforts support President Biden's government-wide strategy to advance gender equity and equality in the United States and around the world. I firmly believe that by adopting more inclusive language, we will help position the aerospace community to be more attractive to all people as they consider their career choices. So today, we'll be having 3 panel discussions. I'm moderating panel 1, which is titled, Welcome Aboard, Inclusive Language and the Aerospace of tomorrow. And following that, Jenny Boyle, Vice President in the Air Traffic Organization, will host panel 2 titled Neutral Now, How Inclusive Language Makes a Difference. Then Angela Anderson, one of our directors in the FAA in the Office of Safety, will host panel 3 titled Embracing Inclusivity, How FAA is Pushing Gender Language Boundaries. Now, after each session, we'll take questions from anyone who's watching or listening in. So let's get our first panel going. With us is Wendy Starr. And Wendy is Director of Policy Initiatives in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion at the New York City Fire Department. Dr. Wendy Okolo, Aerospace Research Engineer at NASA, and Jesse Lane, Assistant Equal Employment Manager, Deputy EEO Director at the United States Secret Service. So we have a number of questions, and let's toss it out. We have until 10:30, so I want to get in as much as we possibly can with that time. So let's get all of the panelists up. Jesse, I see you there as well. If we can come on. Now, question 1, and again, you all have made impressive moves to incorporate inclusive language into your organization's mission, such as with NASA's Diversity and Inclusion Program, the Fire Department of New York recruitment efforts, and the U.S. Secret Service. And again, let's see if each of you can talk about how you made those changes. So Wendy, let's start out with you and go to Wendy Starr. Let's start out with you, then go to Wendy Okolo and to Jesse Lane as we go forward. So Wendy Starr.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. And I love having 2 Wendy's on a panel. It's awesome.
All right.
So, this is such an important question, and I really appreciate having to have thought about this on my own for this. As it became necessary to diversify the firefighter rank, whether that was internal pressure, external pressure, and the real wish to do so, the importance of being strategic, purposeful, and intentional really came forward. And so we needed to think about our use of language as well as imaging in all of our promotional materials. We have thousands of recruitment efforts every few weeks in all different neighborhoods. And so in order to really draw in a diverse candidate, we had to make sure that nothing said fireman, for example. That's a pretty simple example. Everything had to say firefighter. All of the imaging had to show our diversity. And we really needed to make sure on our Join FDNY page, our materials, our We Are FDNY campaign, which is a campaign showcasing all different people and their stories, that everything was extremely inclusive so that we drew in people who wanted to go for it. It's not an easy job to get. It's not an easy job to go for. And so you have to feel motivated that you're going to be welcomed. And I think that intention for all of our forward-facing material was really important and is a work in progress. We continue to check it and make sure.
Okay. Wendy Okolo.
Yes, so thanks for having me. And while I figure out the technical difficulties with my camera, let me just, answer this question.
Okay.
So I'm an aerospace engineer with a technical background, but when I started at NASA for the first 2 to 3 years I was there, as a special emphasis programs manager for women. And in that role, I was supposed to demonstrate, NASA's commitment to the recruitment and retention of women. And I was so excited about that role that I didn't want to just plan events that were, kumbaya and let's eat cake. So I had an intern, a PhD student in psychology, actually start to look at our language use in position descriptions at NASA. And she would use this tool to analyze how gendered, how heavily gendered, or how neutral the language was in the positions that we would put up for even very technical positions, and compare them with organizations, private companies, and industry in the Bay Area where NASA Ames Research Center is. And we came up with a report and we disseminated that report very widely. And I'm happy to say that within, even my technical group at NASA Ames, people are starting to make those changes and understanding that the way positions are written, even for internship postings, has a heavy influence on who applies to those jobs. So if you want diverse candidates to apply, you have to think more critically about how you write up the position descriptions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Jesse, what about your experience at the Secret Service?
I'm happy to be a part of this conversation today. It's a
Thank you.
wonderful topic. Being the first, I was the first person appointed to serve as the diversity program manager for the agency. And we launched our diversity program back in 1987. And I just remember the trajectory of the program and how it changed. Initially, it was managing diversity, and then we moved to the element of inclusion. And when we moved to inclusion, we talked about inclusive language. So I'd like to kind of fast forward to what we're doing right now with regard to incorporating inclusive language. We have established what's called an Inclusion and Engagement Council in the agency. And it's a platform, a proactive platform for creating a greater level of inclusion across our entire workforce. So in 2016, we launched this initiative, and about 80 people throughout our agency across different ranks signed up for this opportunity. And we call ourselves Game Changers, and we represent every occupation. We focus our efforts, again, on creating and sustaining a culture that involves collaboration. So within this Game Changer, or the Inclusion and Engagement Council, we try to create a sense of belonging and connection to the Secret Service mission. We assist our employees with recognizing how much they're valued and respected and appreciated. And we encourage them to share their thoughts, diversity of thought and perspectives. And lastly, we ask our employees to use their career experiences, both their challenges and their triumphs, to mentor other employees. So the IEC is chaired by a senior executive. So we are fortunate to be able to carry this message, whatever initiatives we come up with in the Inclusion and Engagement Council, to the top of the agency. And membership is open to all Secret Service employees across our entire enterprise. And we have a very robust group of employees that meet bi-weekly, and we talk about inclusion a lot.
All right, that's great. That's great. Well, let's pivot a little bit to your workplace culture. And what value does having an inclusive environmental culture have in the workplaces? And that, and to be frank, have been male dominated for many, many years. Wendy Starr, let's start out with you again here, and then we'll go to Jesse, and then to Wendy Oakland.
Thank you. The value of having a diverse workforce, similar to what Jesse was saying, is so proven and necessary, right? It brings more innovation, more creativity, better profit for businesses, more effective teams. I mean, there is just now in 2021 a plethora of materials and studies showing the benefits of having a diverse workforce. So when I think of FDNY and I think of inclusive culture, if you are able to diversify the workforce, which we are doing, which takes time, but we are doing at FDNY each year, each class, each probationary class. If you diversify the firehouses, if you diversify the EMS stations, but people do not feel that they can bring their true selves, then all of those benefits of diversity are not coming to fruition. And so when I think of inclusion, I think of how do we make it so that every single firefighter, every EMS person, every civilian, every fire prevention officer, every inspector can do their duties and feel comfortable enough to bring their authentic selves. I mean, how can they feel positive coming to work and that they want to engage with their ideas? They feel that they can bring up their different perspectives. Because without that, then the benefits of diversity aren't really there, despite having potentially a diverse workforce. And so I look at it as if that value is paramount to being able to really have the best of the best. And we are FDNY, I think we are the best. And so we have to continue to bring that, to bring all our different perspectives. And it's my job at the Office of Diversity and Inclusion to help people figure out how to do that. And it's not an easy feat, but we work each day to figure that out.
Okay. Jesse, again, from that male dominated, or from, all of these organizations have been male dominated, but again, how have you changed culture?
Absolutely. Wendy, that was absolutely spot on. Bringing your authentic self to work is amazing, and that's what we strive to do. But establishing a culture of inclusion or foundation, again, can change the trajectory of your culture. It impacts the way that we it impacts the way that we hire and retain our greatest assets, which is our dedicated employee base. But inclusion is an action word. Everyone has to get involved in inclusion-related initiatives to see the residual benefits. For any organization, inclusion is more than checking the box, right? To ensure continual process in this space, it has to be a strategic plan that's established around the entire organization to have that solid foundation where people feel comfortable talking about difference and the differences that we bring to the workforce, and instilling that sense of value that we bring, and recognizing that in other people and having those difficult conversations. For me, it connects us all because we have to engage, because we have traditionalists in our workplace when we talk about the generations: baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, and the new generation Alpha. And we have to increase our bandwidth to have a transfer of knowledge in that space as well, to value what each generation brings to the table, and an opportunity to create the future of the organization, because there has to be some succession planning and conversation in this space so that we can shore up for the future challenges that we face as an organization. So I'm extremely interested in creating this platform, maintaining this platform, welcoming new ideas and strategies. We have a talented employee base here in the Secret Service, but we have to prepare the people that are exiting the workforce. We have to train the people that are coming in so that they can carry the torch for other people to follow, right? Opening that door for inclusion, recognizing our benefits that we have in embracing everyone's ideologies and perspectives. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
I think Bradley, you were muted, but I figured that's
I'm
my
sorry.
cue.
I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I
No
was muted,
worries.
and I was telling Jessie she feels the passion. So, and then Wendy, let's move further. I was muted. I'm sorry.
No worries, no worries. I think, inclusion is important, but historically, diversity and inclusion and equity and accessibility, these have always been kind of separate from the missions. They're always standing completely independent. Well, that's not really what we're here to do, right? Those are little side nice things to do, but that's not why what we're here to do. And it's interesting because safety is, separate from the mission, but is more integral to any mission, to any technical goal, any objective than diversity and equity and inclusion in particular. So how do we make them more of the same? How do we show that importance, particularly with inclusion. And for me, I feel it's not just important to, to make people feel included, but to really have key strategic recommendations for people to not just empower their own selves to contribute, but to empower others to contribute as well. For whatever technical goal or objective it is that you have in an organization, you have to stay ahead of the curve, right? And if
Mhm.
your people do not feel empowered and do not feel included, that is to your own detriment, right? You can think, well, we've always been here. We've been here for 60, 70, 80 years. I'm from an old organization as well. So I can relate. We're like, well, things worked, but the times are changing. And I know that change is hard, but change is inevitable. They're not mutually exclusive. So I think inclusion is extremely important in various facets of life.
Hey, Wendy, Okolo, let me stick with you and on this next question, and we'll go in reverse. Let's have you altered any terminology within the organization for your workforce or external audience? And again, can you give us examples of kind of what you've altered, and kind of the reception that you received once you did that?
Yeah, that's a great question because no one wants to really be the person that's rocking the boat, right? This is the
Right.
status quo. And how do you rock the boat and still be perceived as a subject matter expert in your field when you rock the boat like that? I will tell you a story. One of my colleagues wrote a paper. I believe it was an AIAA paper, which is the premier organization for aerospace engineers in the United States. And in this paper, she was referring to the pilot and literally said the pilot would do so and so. And in that situation, and even I was taken aback. And I'm like, what in the world? What is it? So I was like, this is great. I was like, this is good. This is good. I'm going to start to do this. And I really will, the next time I write a paper that I have to refer to a pilot as someone people generally consider a he, it's going to be a she for me. But the examples I gave with the language used in the positions, I've changed. I've definitely changed. When I write an internship posting, when I'm trying to hire someone new, it's speaking to the creativity versus the need to be a subject matter expert or to know this or to know that. And I can do a test. I can copy the text that I've written and run it through this quick language analyzer and see how heavily gendered it is or how neutral it is. But
Okay.
but I am making those changes, and I hope people are as well.
Jesse, what's the experience been at Secret Service?
Well, because we are operating under the Department of Homeland Security, we have been operating under the Gender Policy Council. So the entire components across DHS have created strategies around gender. So it kind of made us look internally at what we're doing here at the Secret Service, and we have begun revising all of our internal policies to modify the language to be gender neutral. It's not uncommon to hear manpower here at the Secret Service, all of those terms that you all have alluded to as well. But some of the things that we're doing that are a little proactive is during Pride Month in June, we moderated and hosted a DHS component-wide panel discussion involving transgender and intersex employees. In July, the Secret Service hosted a training session entitled A Thoughtful Conversation About Gender Identity and Pronouns, during which we discussed inclusive language. And on November 16th, our agency is participating in Pride in Federal Service, entitled Transgender, Non-Binary, and Gender Non-Conforming, in which a Secret Service employee will be serving as a panelist. So we are really pushing our employees out there. We are trying to craft the language around it through our policies, but we're also engaging in very active dialogue about it. So pretty happy about the results, and people are getting used to and understanding how important this is for the future of the agency, because for us, it is every action every day. It's not just saying it, it's demonstrating it.
Okay.
So that is becoming our mantra.
Wendy Starr at the fire department, New York Fire Department, same kind of thing. How has that transitioned? How is that woven
Right.
into the fabric of the department?
We're working on the weaving, that's for sure, but we've been able to change a lot of terminology, some that I think has been really ingrained now and is used much more often. I mean, the really common example that I said before is fireman to firefighter, which I think is pretty commonly used now. I mean, I think there's some people who still use fireman and then correct themselves, but as far as certain things that I've been learning are personnel terminology that needed to be changed. I think Jesse alluded to overtime. We had something called MMOT, which was minimum manning overtime, which has now been changed at, many people's pushing and much discussion to minimum staffing overtime. And a battalion chief recently described to me that when you're out in the field, it used to be that your location that you were assigned was based on included man. So it would be the person doing it would go to the nozzle, let's say, and you'd be the nozzleman. And now they say, just go to the nozzle. And so the terminology in the field has really changed, not to talk about who's doing it, but what's the function of it. And I think that's been pretty established. I mean, the reception is mixed, as is much culture change. I mean, for the most part, I think, newer probationary firefighters come in and EMS and that are more, sort of used to inclusive, gender neutral language in their life, there's been more reception. And, I think that for the most part, we see a pretty highly receptive audience with respect to language being gender neutral, in part because it's accurate now it's more accurate now when you look at the diverse workforce that we've been able to expand to at FDNY. And so it's been really a push, and similar to what my other panelists were saying, from a policy perspective, which is a little different than changing the words in the field, we've had to be very intentional to review all of our policies, whether it's the EO policies, lactation policies, all of those different policies that we've put out to make sure that they're inclusive, both in practice and in language. And so it's been intentional.
Okay. This last 2 or 3 minutes here, I just want to kind of hear from all three of you again. And again, best practices. How can you share how organizations can be more welcoming to prospective employees and their stakeholders as we go forward? Let me hear from you quickly, Jesse, Wendy Okolo, and then Wendy Starr wrap up.
Okay, best practices. For the 11th consecutive year, the Secret Service has hosted what's called Unity Day. And it's a celebration that we acknowledge all of the unique diversities across our entire place. We get a team of employees together, we come up with a theme, and then we host a variety of inspiring events to enhance cross-cultural awareness. This event has become very popular here, and it creates that sense of camaraderie, teamwork, harmony, pride, and mutual respect. So we are continually celebrating. We continue to look for ways to enhance our diversity and inclusion umbrella here at the Secret Service, and we are very, very proud of this Unity Day event that we've done, because it involves every aspect of our organization, from the top of our organization to our employees. And it's really been a welcomed event where this year's theme was the power of you, unique, united, and unstoppable. So we crafted a lot of activities around that. So thank you.
All right, Wendy Okolo.
Yeah, I'll give a few. One is to not put the onus of diversity and inclusion on the people that are underrepresented. Let it be, a top down, everyone is involved in this. Everyone is excited about this initiative, and everyone is invested in this as well. Another best practice, I think, is really to have inclusion as one of the pillars or one of the thrusts of any organization, right? The way safety is, as crucial as safety is, let inclusion be. And three, just really gauge, go back. I think it's important to always go back and gauge, see how well you're doing, right? It's one thing to design and take on these initiatives. It's another thing to really assess how well you're doing. So whatever that metric is for success, define it and check in with that periodically. Those are just a few. And then four, I mean, just hire someone or pay a consultant that can come out, you know, with an outside view and really tell you like it is, right? Tell it like it is, and don't rely on, or again, put the burden on employees to do that work for you.
Okay, thank you. Wendy Starr, real quick to close it out.
Sure. I think that really listening to the people who are coming into the organization and finding out what they need is a difficult best practice to put in, but needs to be done. Instead of deciding what, from an administrative perspective, like what everyone coming in needs. And so a best practice I would put out there, which sounds simple, is really active listening to what can make it a more welcoming environment and what's needed by the employees coming in. And I'll wrap it up there. I know we're on a time schedule.
We're at time, and that went too fast. Next time we'll have to allot more time. But we appreciate your input here today. Wendy Starr from New York Fire Department, Jesse Lane from U.S. Secret Service, and Wendy Okolo from NASA. Thank you so much for your participation this morning. Go ahead,
Brad, so please don't let them hang up yet, because we've got some questions, live questions coming in. So Pat writes and wants the three of you to answer this. You represent a broad spectrum of private and public sector employers. What are the commonalities and differences in your visions of what inclusion looks like? Let's start with Wendy Okolo. It's nice to see you on. I'm glad you got your technology corrected. It's great to see your face. Oh, and now you're on mute.
No, I was like, well, would I really be working at NASA if my tech worked all the time? You know, so switch to my phone. So I think one of the commonalities I see is that we're all in very heavy male dominated fields. And you know, and from the perspective of championing inclusion, we also always have to remember to find our voices, right? It's easy to sit on this panel and say what it is that we'd recommend or what it is we think organizations should be doing. But even in our day-to-day, we have to be those voices and those agents that empower others through the way we empower ourselves as well. So we're all in male-dominated fields. I see that even just kind of from hearing the other panelists, and those are one of the commonalities that I see. A future that we are empowered to contribute, say these things openly, and empower others as well.
Jesse?
Okay. When I think about that question, I think about people coming into the workplace and, like Wendy said, having their voice, but also creating a space where we set the stage for change, but then let it happen in a fluid method, because you really can't dictate. When you allow people to give their perspectives and share their differences, you have to create a space for that. And being as authentic as you possibly can, and being able to have tough discussions. When post George Floyd, the Secret Service hosted a town hall meeting, and we invited our employee base to tell us how that impacted them, those that were on the front lines. We created that platform to deal with things that were difficult. And I think that being authentic is just paramount to us understanding, recognizing, and appreciating our commonalities as well as our differences.
Thank you. And Wendy Starr.
One thing that I think is probably common from what I can tell from the panel and listening to everyone speaking is really the way that storytelling and hearing everyone's narratives at their job and their different experiences is a way to bring inclusion. And I see that at many different agencies, whether public or private, that the more we can learn about each other and learn about our experiences, the more we expand on inclusion. And so I think that's a strong commonality that we all share in doing this work, and how to help people bring those stories. How can we as whatever role we're playing in diversity, inclusion, and equity in our agency, how can we provide a platform to assist people in being able to tell their stories is something that has been very important to us at FDNY and other people I know working in the public sector.
Cool. Thank you. So I've got another question for you. David writes the following: from your perspective, how does inclusive language translate into a more welcoming workplace environment? Does it help with recruitment and retention? When you start, we'll start with you.
I mean, I think it has to help. I don't see how it couldn't. I mean, when I was a young lawyer and going to apply to various jobs, it was very much male dominated as well in the job descriptions and in the discussions. And that was tough. That was hard to get motivated, hard to get inspired. It definitely bred self-doubt and self-confidence. And so I think the more that you can see yourself, whether it's through language, whether it's through images, which are also powerful, whether it's through our advertising, if you're going to go to something and be able to bring your best job to that interview, your best self to that, it's going to be harder if you don't feel right from the bat that you're included as someone that they're welcoming to bring that, to go to that interview, to go to that job, to do that test. And so I think that it can't not really matter, maybe not to everyone, but overall.
Wendy Oklo, same question.
Oh yeah, I can give you the stats to show that it does matter. Just a number of them. Here's one example: Harvey Mudd College, who increased female computer science major from 10 to 40% over 4 years. One of their tactics: changing the names of the courses from a course like Introduction to Programming in Java to Creative Approaches to Problem Solving in Science and Engineering using Python, right? The research doesn't lie. Increasing the amount of feminine descriptions in a job advertisement doesn't decrease male interest, but it increases female interest. People like Galcher and co. have done work on this from 2011. Each additional masculine description reduces the odds of a woman filling the position by 47%. Gorman, 2005. So if you want it, you can find the numbers that prove it does matter, and changing the kind of language that you put out there. It's because women are inherently, this is for me, qualified enough to step away from positions seem too masculine structured, requiring so much from us. Get on the job. Oh, I can do this, right? But it just was portrayed as something that is difficult to do. So it matters. I hope they believe me. I'm not making it up. The numbers don't lie.
Cool. And Jessie.
All right. I totally believe that inclusive language promotes fair and equitable treatment for all. And one of the things that I have a frequent discussion with our recruiters, because we're all looking at our stats and all trying to make sure that we're meeting the mark and making sure that we have our underrepresentation addressed. But one of the things that I love is that our agency, the people that do the recruiting, they said, we know we have to abide by the executive orders that are coming through, but it's just the right thing to do. And we really, we appreciate it, but we have already started down that path before we were given the mandates, before those executive orders came about. We have a great relationship with EEO, we discuss things, and we plan our strategies. And I think when you, without having to dictate it, that it just comes organically and naturally for the people that are responsible for that, I think you've kind of hit a win-win. So I love the fact that we create this platform for change, but when people have their individual aha moments and they take it upon themselves to make it happen, I think that is a recipe for success. So that is something that we look at and evaluate across the entire organization.
So I think we have time for one last question. And Deputy Administrator Brad, if you want to weigh in on this last question, you're welcome to as well. And so for all of you, what would you tell the next generation of career professionals to do better? And that question came from Brittany. So Jesse, why don't you kick us off?
All right. What I would tell the next generation is to embrace the ideologies and perspectives of all people. Don't put a cap on anything, right? Use your opportunity within the agency to align yourself with someone that is different from you, right? See what they can tell you that will help you on your career path or trajectory to keep this message of inclusive diversity ongoing, because the bottom line is we will all benefit when we all learn to appreciate and respect and embrace differences. The entire organization will benefit from those efforts. Now, it's not something that you see right away. It's something that you have to keep creating an opportunity to have courageous conversations and discussions about things that might be a little difficult. But at the end of the day, if we can all share the same vision and identify which direction we're going in as it relates to the mission of the organization, then we have hit a home run. We have definitely. So glean information from the people around you. Step outside of your comfort zone. Create those conversations. Invite someone different to lunch. Just do it. Make it happen through every action every day.
Awesome. NASA, Wendy?
I like that, NASA Wendy. I agree with Jesse very strongly. I would advise the next generation to be curious, be diligent, and not judgmental. If you're curious, you open yourself up to learning so much more. If you're judgmental and you believe you understand, you're closed to the learning. And there is so much to learn, right? Like Jesse said, within and outside your organization, there is so much to learn. So don't let the stress of feeling like you need to perform keep you from being curious. There is a lot to learn. There are many people doing many exciting things within and outside your agencies, within and outside your organizations. Stay curious.
Awesome. And FDNY, Wendy?
Well, I definitely echo what Jesse and my fellow Wendy said on this. I mean, they were basically speaking my mind as I was thinking about the question, and so I really appreciate their comments. I think one thing that came to mind besides what they were talking about was, and something that I try to teach my two sons is that you don't have to feel that you need to fit a certain mold. That you can bring your best self going in and really be true to yourself, and not to feel that pressure to stifle yourself or be a certain way. And so I think besides being open and receptive to all these different perspectives and other people is to also be able to be who you are and not to feel too pressured to conform to something else. So that's my ending thoughts on that one.
Deputy Administrator, do you have anything you'd like to tell the generation of career professionals to do?
For me is, I say to lean in on the non-traditional. I am one who wants to blaze new trails. And just like with what Wendy Starr said, I have an 8-year-old granddaughter, and I am pushing her to do things that are non-traditional for women to do. I want her to be one of the things, I want her to be a race car driver. I want her to do some of the things in science and engineering that women have not done traditionally. And my daughter is doing a great job at pushing her as well. So lean in, do those things that you don't see that your gender doing. And if people are kind of trying to push you, just push harder. You push back even harder. So I believe in that. I live that, and I make sure that I taught my daughter And I'm teaching my granddaughter to do the same thing as I go forward. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and close out if that's okay, Abby.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and again, I just want to thank each one of you for such an intriguing and relevant and informative discussion this morning, and appreciate your input. And I'm hopeful for the advancement in integrating more inclusive language in our workforce. And again, as we go forward, again, thank you, thank you, thank you. This is just the end of the first part. So as we're dealing with technology, please turn off your cameras and mute your mics as we prepare for the next panel, and look forward to doing this and to continue to do this in the future as we go forward. So have a great day, and thank you again for your participation. Back to you, Abby.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Deputy and Jesse and Wendy. So the next panel in our next segment, Jenny Boyle, who's our Vice President of the System Operations Services for FAA's Air Traffic Organization, will lead a panel to discuss how inclusive language makes a difference. Jenny, it's great to see you. Take it away.
All right, thank you, Abby. I'm honored to be here. This is a great conversation that's going on. We're going to continue with panel 2. So I invite panel 2 to turn on their cameras while I introduce them as well, my distinguished panelists. First, we have Captain Houston Mills. He is presently the Vice President of Flight Operations and Safety. He has global oversight of and responsibility for UPS airline flight operations, training, regulatory compliance, and airline safety. Houston served as a global aviation strategy and public policy director, where he advocated for federal and international aviation policy and collaborated with domestic and international industry groups to harmonize aviation safety standards and sustainability rules. Under his leadership, UPS became one of the first airlines, or US airlines, to have certified safety management system. He currently serves as the chairman of the FAA Drone Advisory Committee, where as one of 35 executive stakeholders, he brings a traditional aviation perspective to a group of other transportation and technology leaders as they explore policy considerations for UAS integration into the national airspace system. Houston began his aviation career in 1985 as a Marine Corps officer. And I'd be remiss if I wouldn't say happy birthday to the Marines today for 246 years. Houston, you look fabulous for 246 years today. He's currently served on the board of directors at the National Center for Family Literacy, RTCA Board of Advisors, Flight Safety Foundation Board of Governors, the Organization of Black Aerospace Professional Board of Advisors, and is president of the Marine Corps Coordinating Council of Kentucky. So welcome, Houston. Next, we have First Officer Camilla Turrieta. She's a member of the Airline Pilots Association. International ALPA, serves as the chair of the President's Committee for Diversity and Inclusion, representing over 61,000 members at 38 airlines. Member of the FAA Drone Advisory Committee, subcommittee that focuses on gender neutral language. She is active volunteer presently with the Women in Aviation, the Organization of Black Aerospace Professionals, and serves as the New York City Regional Director for the Latino Pilots Association. She's a spokesperson for the organ donation throughout the United States, raising awareness about organ donation. Her steadfast commitment to community service and volunteer efforts are recognized nationally, and she's a 2-time recipient of the President's Call to Service Award. This award is given to individuals who have completed over 4,000 hours of community service in their lifetime. This award was presented to her by President George W. Bush and President Barack Obama. Welcome. And then our third panelist is Michelle Swartz, Chief Corporate Strategy and Affairs Officer at Los Angeles World Airport, better known as LAWA, which is the City of Los Angeles's department that owns and operates Los Angeles International and Van Nuys airports. She's responsible for developing and implementing department-wide policy and strategy that advances Los Angeles World Airport's agenda and priorities. She manages relationships and communication with all internal and external stakeholders, directs LAWA's social responsibilities, including providing opportunities for local people and businesses. She shepherds the department innovation strategies, spearheads the media and community engagement surrounding LAWA's $15 billion capital improvement program, and led successful efforts to secure more than $700 million in federal COVID-19 relief funding. Her previous government service roles include Chief of Staff of the Federal Aviation Administration and has held various positions in the U.S. Senate. Thank you to our panelists joining us today, and we're happy to have you here. We're excited and look forward to your insight. So we're going to get started with some questions on how inclusive language makes a difference. So you're all going to get a little twist on question one. And Camilla, I'm going to start with you, if that's all right. So can you please tell us a little bit about the present demographics in the U.S. airline industry, and what has your organization done to create a more inclusive and diverse environment?
Thank you, Jenny, for the kind introduction, and thank you for the FAA for putting together this Inclusive Language Summit. ALPA has a long history of reaching out to aspiring aviators and supporting all pilots. But before we get into our current initiatives that you just asked, I'd really like to start with some really high-level demographics that really demonstrate why we do the work that we do today. So according to 2020 data from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, the makeup of our country's pilots is roughly 94% white male. That means that the remaining 6% is made up of women, members of the LGBTQIA+ community, and other members of other underrepresented groups. When we drill down even further into ALPA specific figures, our current composition is that our female pilots make up 5.7% of our total membership and only 3.6% are captains, which is shockingly low given that our total membership is a little bit over 63,000 members strong. And one more interesting demographic that panel one touched upon is the generational differences. So when we think internally within ALPA and our demographics, we look at that we have 4 different types of pilot generations in our flight decks today, starting with our baby boomers all the way to our Gen Zs. And pilot generations to us are really important because it allows us to understand how various generations learn and communicate. So our composition right now, ALPA's Gen Xers, who are pilots born between 1965 to 1980, they make up 46% of our membership, and they represent the largest generation type within ALPA. So clearly, based on these statistics that I just gave, something needed to be done within ALPA and the aviation industry as a whole. So several years ago, ALPA President Captain Joe DePete established the President's Committee for Diversity and Inclusion that I currently chair to cultivate and promote an inclusive and welcoming culture at ALPA and across the piloting profession. The committee itself, when we first got together, we put together our thoughts and built a strategic plan that allowed us to build a foundation of all of the work that we're going to accomplish at the Airline Pilots Association. And that begins with encouraging diversity in our future members, cultivating and supporting an inclusive workplace, but also ensuring that we have the proper leadership support to help us achieve those goals. And through this strategic plan, we have also been able to bring awareness through the creation of an inclusive language reference guide that gives members and our staff at ALPA the importance of pronouns, awareness of masculine generalization, stereotypes, and compounded words such as man and men. So to date, what we have been able to do, we went into our policy manuals at ALPA National, and we have been able to replace the standalone he pronoun to replace it with the pronouns they, them, and their when referring to our member pilots. On the more local level, at 38 different airlines that we represent at ALPA, we're working airline by airline on adding gender inclusive language to our contractual bargaining agreements. by applying the same changes that we've done at ALPA National. And just imagine that it's 2021 and some of our negotiated pilot contracts still have a section found within that the contract itself shall be deemed and understood to designate any crew member, whether they are male or female, when the he pronoun is used. So to finish, more broadly, ALPA has been extremely involved in work within the United States, such as the Drone Advisory Committee that Houston Mills currently chairs, to incorporate gender neutral language. The initiative did get some really good press this year, and it represents a huge shift away from gender terms that have been used in our industry for decades. But even more broadly on the global level, ALPA, we're extremely involved with international groups like the International Federation of Airline Pilots and ICAO to ensure that we're advancing opportunities for underrepresented communities around the world.
Wow, that's great. Thank you very much. I'm going to shift to you, Michelle. Can you let the audience know about all the diverse occupations at LAWA and what has your organization done to create a more inclusive and diverse environment?
Thanks so much, Jenny. Thank you for having me here today. As a former FAA employee, it's particularly gratifying to see this amazing symposium happening and all of the great work that's taking place. For running what was in 2019, the third busiest airport in the world with 88 million passengers coming through, of course, we're dealing with our own employees, our own workforce, which is about 3,100 people strong, but we're also dealing with tens of thousands of people who are working at the airport, whether they're working for airlines, for our federal partners, for concessions, or for, as you mentioned in introducing me, Jenny, our $15 billion capital improvement program that's currently underway, and through which we've already opened 4 new facilities this year alone in the middle of the pandemic. So pretty proud of that. And we need a very large workforce to build that. And at the same time that there's a lot of other construction going on in the city of Los Angeles. And in the report that we put together as part of the tasking for the Drone Advisory Committee, on which Camilla and I both served on gender neutral language, we started with a quote from Deputy Administrator Mims, where he really talked about infrastructure being jobs. And that's what we view our mandate as at Los Angeles World Airports, that we're not just building the airport of the future, but we're also building the workforce of the future. And so we have one of the longest standing project labor agreements in the country, more than 20 years strong, and recently renewed for another 10 with the Los Angeles and Orange County Building and Construction Trades Council. And several years ago, working with the trades, we put together a nation-leading program called the Hire LAX Apprenticeship Readiness Program, which was part of really the imperative to have at least a 30% local hire. That's one of the requirements of our project labor agreement on all of our projects. And how could we make sure that we were really developing the workforce that would be necessary for that? And the Hire LAX Apprenticeship Readiness Program has now graduated 10 cohorts, about 250 people total, and really seeks to bring people into the building trades who would not ordinarily be in those careers. And so we're very proud that more than 20% of the graduates have been women. About a third of the graduates have prior involvement in the criminal justice system. And also about 50% of the graduates have been African American. So it's a really diverse program. A lot of outreach has been done. And we have about an 80% success rate in placing the graduates of that program onto construction projects building the future of LAX and the future of the city of Los Angeles. One thing that still stands out, though, is that one of the great successes of the program is that we recently, earlier this year, had the first graduate of the program who graduated from apprentice to journeyman. That just kind of pointed out that, the quest for gender neutral language extends, beyond aviation and into these broader industries that we deal with as well.
Right. Well, thanks, Michelle. All right, Houston, we're going to shift to you. So, wow, what a 20 months has been going on for the airline industry, and obviously due to COVID. Now, during a time period where most of the airline carriers had to reduce their workforce initially, and then they've had to kind of ramp back up to, since we're pretty close to normal operations, close to 96% of normal. Now, the freight operators, they continued to operate and actually had to expand during the pandemic. So freight operators are running about 10% of what was used to be considered normal operation. So you've had to increase your workforce. So what has your organization done to create a more inclusive and diverse environment?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question. First of all, it's an honor to be here with these distinguished panelists, Camille, Michelle. Great to see you guys, and thanks so much for your contributions to the Joint Advisory Committee and our gender neutral language. And Jenny, always good to see you. It's interesting. If I could just kind of step back real quick, the Joint Advisory Committee was just so honored that the FAA tasked us to look at this very important subject matter, because it's part of who we are at UPS as well. And I think those two things tie in, and to have this conversation continuing is just great. For us, we at UPS, we serve the world. Our purpose is moving the world forward by delivering what matters. And, we're more than just we deliver more than just packages. We deliver hope. And so as we serve the world and our service providers go around the world, we see the world. And so we serve every community in the world. That's what we do. And so it's very important that our workforce is reflection of the very communities that we serve. And so we have a new DEI chief executive, Charlene Thomas, and one of the rallying calls that we've used to kind of embrace this culture that we've always had is "you belong." And so this thing of inclusion, you belong here, right? You belong in this community, you belong to be part of this organization. So it's really important that we're very intentional in creating a culture and environment where people feel, valued, or they feel like they can be heard, or they feel like they can contribute. And so throughout this pandemic, we've been one of the few companies that have been hiring very actively. We've been busy delivering vaccines and other things around the world, but we haven't lost focus, of this sense of being intentional about ensuring that we have this inclusive culture. We have one of the few female CEOs in the world, Fortune 500, Carol B. Tomei. She's doing a phenomenal job. Leadership by example, we like to say 40% of our board of directors are female, 37% are of our executive leadership team. And so, and it goes on, 35% of our senior middle management, it goes on and on and on. But what we found is it's very important that we create a pipeline of talent development, so that next layer of leadership is ready and prepared when opportunities present themselves. And so creating an environment where people can be their authentic selves, which I heard in the earlier panel, is so important, and bringing talent on board, and then ensuring that talent is given the environment where they can grow, where they can contribute, where they can innovate, where they can just make the organization better. That's exactly what we try to do here at UPS. So we're very proud. We've been very active, very fortunate to be part of this recovery effort. Very proud to be able to bring on the future generations of UPSers. We've been around for a long time, since 1907. So we plan on being around for a much longer time. And that's only going to happen with a great, inclusive environment and a workforce.
All right, thanks, Houston. All right, the second question, I'll start with you, Camilla. We'll go in the same order if that's all right. And it's a two-part question. So today we're talking about inclusive language. So what, if any, strategic shifts have you made to your recruitment and retention efforts for diversity and inclusion? And then the second part is, have you seen any marked shifts to support diversity and inclusion?
Thanks, Jenny. So for all of those that are familiar with the Airline Pilots Association, like I mentioned before, we represent 63,000 members at 38 different airlines. So we're working at every level possible to create an inspiring and accessible and affordable airline piloting profession. And the work of the President's Committee for Diversity and Inclusion is to work collaboratively with our National Education Committee in outreach efforts, which will result in many of our pilots, tens of thousands actually, visiting students at schools and communities and industries and industry events every year. So one initiative that we have taken since the creation of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee has been to plot out where we have visited students in the past and identifying geographical gaps where we need to find local ALPA pilots to visit communities that have never seen a pilot before. One other initiative out of the many that we have is that we've been working on finding ways to negotiate parental leave into our pilot group contracts that don't already have them. Not only does this help with a more equitable workplace for today's pilots, but it's also something that current and future pilots are really interested in. And the opportunity to have a rewarding career and a family is of utmost importance, because we're not just looking at the numbers here of how many people can we get through the door, but how many can we retain throughout the duration of their careers.
Right, thank you. All right, Michelle, I'm going to give you the same question. I can read it for you again if you'd like. Oh, you got it? All right, good. All right, I love it. Go ahead, go for it.
All right, thanks, Jenny. So, for us at Los Angeles World Airports, over the past year and a half, we did have a hiring freeze that we put in place in February of 2020 as COVID-19 was starting to ramp up, and we saw what the fiscal consequences would be for us. And so we've had, a lot of a focus on retention and on promotion. In addition to hiring, we are beginning to be able to hire some people again. But I think that, one of the things that we wanted to really take a look at is where are there inequalities? Because overall, we do not have equal numbers of men and women, but we do pretty well, and we do a lot better than the city of Los Angeles as a whole. But there are some disparities, when you look at the different job classifications, and as well as when you look at, the highest level, although our board is 3 women out of the 7 members, and our executive team is also very balanced in terms of gender. And so, a few years ago, the city of Los Angeles controller put out a report regarding pay and found that only 2 of the 100 highest paid city employees were women, and which was, I think, very eye-opening. And that points to some of the disparities that we see in job classification. So, for example, the police are the job classifications that tend to have the most overtime, which that in turn leads to higher pay. And that's a classification where you do not have as many women. If you look at, some of our specific classifications at the airport, when we're looking at engineers, which might tend to be more highly paid as well. And so, for us, it's really been a focus on how can we make sure that we're recruiting and also providing those advancement opportunities within those job classifications in particular, and also making sure that nobody is kind of hitting that glass ceiling and is able to keep working their way up. And so some of that has been through our outreach, and then also through programming that we've done internally, like creating a women's association, like creating a mentorship program that allows for really one-on-one mentorship, as well as broader programming. So, constantly reinforcing those messages and being able to hear from women and others on the ground as to what they need to keep advancing in their careers.
Yeah, I'll kind of build on what Michelle. Very, very similar at UPS. I think, of course, as I mentioned earlier, we've been hiring. We haven't stopped anything, from inception. But I'll tell you some of the things that we do. We're very intentional in terms of making sure at the recruitment part of our process, even with our pilots or mechanics, it doesn't matter, all portions of our business. We want to make sure that we've got a workforce that reflects the world that we serve. So that starts with that. So it's not, it's an expectation. And so you can't come and say, well, I didn't know. No, that's an expectation. So it starts there. But then once folks come here, it's really important that, we develop them. So I think from a retention perspective, we can't just bring, it's not enough just to onboard folks that, you want to be inclusive or to have a diversity. You have to do something to make sure that that talent is being developed. And so we're very intentional in our talent development. We have multiple business resource groups that allow folks, to be comfortable and network and grow in those various environments. We have programs that establish mentorships. We have this wonderful program called SOAR. That's a very intentional multi-month development program from a leadership perspective that allow folks to not only network with their peers, but also to grow as leaders. We provide folks with executive sponsors so they can gain insights in addition to just mentors, but executive sponsors so they can kind of see, where they can be in the future. And so we take a holistic approach, here at UPS in terms of how do we ensure that our future leaders are just that. They have a very broad understanding. They have a very broad network. They're in an environment where they can be their authentic selves and share insights and raise concerns without fear of retribution. So all those components kind of come together in terms of what do you do to retain, because people want to be part, of a great organization and they feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves. I know in my leadership journey, it's always been about, servant leadership, being able to contribute and make things better. And so we want to create an environment that allows all of our people to be their authentic selves, be their best selves, and contribute at the highest level. So we're very intentional when we bring people on. We're very intentional once they get here, and we continue that process throughout the journey here at UPS.
Thanks, Houston. So the next question I have for all three of you. So gender inclusivity and diversity pertaining to language has created a lot of energy on both sides of the topic. So what would you say to those that are a little bit slower to change? I'll start with you again, Camilla, if that's okay.
Thank you, Jenny. Very good question. I think that we can all agree on the need for the United States to secure a more robust and highly qualified aviation workforce, not just now, but also in the future. And part of attracting aspiring pilots is to create an environment where they see themselves, feel like they belong, but that they're also able to bring their authentic selves to work, not just on a particular day, but each and every day. And while we know that historically masculine generalizations have been used as a default term to represent all genders within a group, there has been a numerous amount of studies that show, even with a disclaimer, that the use of the pronoun he is overwhelmingly interpreted as representing only men. And while the he is often meant to include women as well, it does not properly represent our women, members of the transgender community, and people with different gender identities. Another example of the work we're doing on the inclusive language front is trying to tackle the man and the men compounded words like airman and chairman. These titles, when I think of them, they were created in a time when the majority of working people were male. And let's face it, there's other people in the industry that are not just males. And as our society continues to evolve, our language should expand to reflect that diversity that we have in the aviation industry and in our nation today and in the future, of course. Something to think about is that in the aviation industry, and it's been mentioned before, we have evolved safety exponentially decade over decade, but we have not evolved the way that we talk about our profession and how individuals are included in policies and publications and communications. And this is an opportunity for us to make those changes. And just like the title of today's panel, inclusive language does make a difference. We want to make sure that we recognize and reflect all of those who make up our membership today and into the future as well.
Thank you so much. Michelle, what would you say to those folks?
Well, I think this is really a business imperative. And so, I think we heard it from the previous panel as well. I was really struck by how Wendy Okolo mentioned at several points that, we need to embed inclusivity in the same way that we've embedded safety. And, what we found in doing our research, and Camilla was a huge contributor to this, for the tasking for the Joint Advisory Committee, was that inclusive language and safety really go hand in hand, and that this is something that's necessary as we continue to improve and evolve safety, that having inclusive language creates that trust that is really necessary for having a safe crew, for having safety in the broader system. And so safety inclusivity already needs to be embedded by virtue of safety being embedded. And we also heard from Wendy Starr in the previous panel about the better business outcomes that you get from having inclusivity and using this inclusive language, in terms of solving problems more quickly, having higher profits, having higher employee engagement. So, I think we all know what happens when you're in a room where everybody agrees with one another. You don't get innovation, you don't, you miss things, whether it's a safety problem, whether it's a business opportunity. And so having that, diversity of viewpoints is really what leads to those better business outcomes and those safer outcomes.
Thanks, Houston.
Yeah, I'll just kind of pick up where Michelle, I was thinking of 3 books, and I always have to help myself frame things up from a book perspective. The first one is by Simon Sinek, and Start with Why. And so one thing that, just helping others to understand what's the why here. And I think is exactly, what Michelle and Camille were referring to. And that is, if you're going to have a team, you got to have trust. And so you got to have people who feel part of that team. So not only do you gain safety, not only do you gain better business outcomes, but you gain trust as part of that. So the why is huge. And, it's funny, the second book is by Stephen Covey Jr. He talks about the speed of trust and how trust, can be the accelerator for different results. So those two things come together. So you can't have a distrustful environment where people don't feel like they're a part of something and be successful. So that's part of it's just common sense, from that perspective. And then there's another book, The Leadership Challenge by Barry Posner and James Kuntz that I recently read. And it's a really good book. I highly recommend it. They're on the 6th edition now. But he talks about they did this study, of exemplary leaders, over the past 35 plus years. And it says, what is it, that you do that leads to your best, when you're your absolute best. So you come up with 5 principles. And one is you got to model the way. You got to walk the talk. You can't just provide a lip service. You got to model the way. Second is you got to inspire. You got to share an inspired vision, a shared vision. And so this vision, I think, is coming. DEI is here to stay. It's who we are as a people. So, we need leaders, the naysayers, let's get on board. This is a shared vision that has to be understood and embraced. And there's going to be people to challenge the process. Exemplary leaders challenge the process. So, just because it was this way for years and years and years, we shouldn't be offended. And I'm a guy. We shouldn't be offended when people are challenging existing process. That's a good thing. That's where innovation comes from. So this is challenge the process and enable others to act. The way I think is different from the way you ladies think. That's okay. You got to be empowered to think, be your authentic selves and bring something to the table. And then the last one, he just says, hey, you got to, encourage the heart. And I think this is important. We all, are part of this human family, if you will. I love my mom, my sisters, my brothers, and they're all, it's just who I am. It's in my DNA. So this isn't nothing new. We just have to embrace it and help move it forward. So that would be my conversation to the naysayers. Say, hey, if you're going to be your absolute best, if you're going to be an exemplary leader, you need to embrace this change. You need to come on board, and we need you to be with us, not trying to resist us.
All right. Well, those are all my questions. Thank you, Houston, Michelle, Camilla. Thank you so much. Stay here because Abby's going to take some Q&A, I believe. So
the
thank
questions
you
are coming in.
All right. That's great. So thank you for the panel. It's my honor to be with you today. So thanks, Abby. I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Jenny. That was really delightful to listen to everybody. So first question is for you, Captain Houston, and it comes from Bill. So Bill says, According to the future of working, diversity in the workplace creates more revenue and earning opportunities. Can you share how UPS has worked to be more gender inclusive and diverse? Have you been able to see this, if this has been reflected at UPS?
Well, I think you're listening to me talk, right? So I am a reflectment to diversity and inclusion. And I can tell you my personal journey as I start off as a line pilot after I transitioned from Marine Corps as an F-18 pilot to just fly the line. And someone saw something in me and says, hey, we think you can do a little bit more. So they nurtured me, brought me in, and then slowly exposed me to a variety of different things that allowed me to grow as a human being, as a person, and then gave me additional responsibility. What was done for me is what's done for many across UPS in this environment. And I think, in this industry, we've got to give people the opportunity, to bring what they bring. I have a very unique perspective, and others have different perspectives that can add value if given the opportunity. So I think absolutely it's important. It takes time, it takes commitment, and I will always say this: it takes sacrifice. And part of my development was, leaders taking me out of my comfort zone and sending me places, even though it hurt them to do so. And but in doing so, it allowed me to grow so I could come back and contribute more. So I think that type of model is one I try to use today in my position as an executive here at UPS. As I try to develop others, I tell my teammates, it's going to take a little bit of sacrifice to make sure that we're successful in the long haul. And so we have to invest in our people to do that. So I'm thankful, but I do think that's a requirement to be successful.
Very nice. Thank you very much. So the next question is for you, Michelle, from Paula. Why is a more diverse talent pool in the aerospace industry important?
Thanks so much, Abby. So, I think that, and it goes back to Captain Mills said earlier about serving the world, which is what, he does at UPS. And at Los Angeles World Airports, our mission is to serve the world, connecting people, places, and cultures. And so, if we look at just the people, places, and cultures who are in our city of Los Angeles and the greater Los Angeles region, we have people from every single place in the world, people representing every different culture. And then it's our business to be bringing people from all over the world, making sure that they feel welcome. And then even closer to home, everything that we do is a partnership. So we're working constantly, with our partners at the FAA, where, our regional administrator is a woman. At Customs and Border Protection, the past 2 port directors have been women. The LA Fire Department, the fire chief at the airport is a woman. And so, this is the world that we are living in, and we need to be a part of it. The aerospace industry is not something that is living, it's in its own silo. We very much are working with everybody around us and people from every single walk of life, and we need to reflect that.
Thank you. So First Officer Camilla, you have a question from Eric. Eric asks, can you share some of your own experiences on the impact that diversity and inclusion has had on your journey to becoming a pilot? Because many have touted this badge of honor to attain the quote airman unquote title. What would you say to those who are hesitant to see the evolution of language? That's a lot. So Eric apparently was very energized.
Another long question, but a really good question as well. So many of us have faced many barriers to becoming a pilot, and some are clearly visible, such as the financial barriers, but then there are some invisible barriers that some of us have faced. And when I think about this question about what has my journey been to becoming a pilot, I think back when my parents and I migrated to the United States from Chile, and I saw an airplane for the very first time. And at that moment, I knew immediately at 7 years old that I wanted to be a pilot. And as I began to learn English and started to visit the library, I visited with this electronic translator to translate books and articles on how to become a pilot. And when I did those translations, I never found anyone that looked like me and that I could relate to in literature and find inspiration to pursue my dreams. And that was really tough because my family's background, they all deal with horses. You know, my dad is a retired jockey, and no one had the expertise to guide me into a STEM field. And I remember clearly when I was in elementary school that I was told by a teacher that I shouldn't worry myself with learning math because that is not something girls should really know about when they grow up. And then later, when I was in high school, and I was very lucky to go to high school in New York, because in New York we have high schools that are themed. So if you want to be a lawyer, you want to be a nurse. I wanted to be a pilot. I picked the high school that had an aviation program. But while I was in high school, I overheard my teacher telling another teacher that there was no use in teaching me anything about flying because I was a girl and girls do not make it as pilots in the aviation industry. So with all of that, and obviously a lot of hard work and determination, I'm here as an airline pilot. But when I think back to what I had to deal with in elementary school and in high school, I can't help but think of the responsibility that teachers and members of society, all of you watching, have in order to mold students into the future generations of aviation professionals. But in my situation, those teachers that were responsible for my success could have been responsible for keeping students like me out of the piloting profession. And this is why we as ALPA and with other organizations, we spend a lot of time every year working extremely hard with elementary and high school students to reach them before they get discouraged because of lack of representation in literature or in other capacities. So at the end of the day, I've heard it all and lived it. You know, I read some of the comments about some of the work that other industries are doing about this is a political agenda, this is a woke movement. And honestly, if we want to be on the right side of history when it comes to these things, we really want to reach out to those who may have never seen themselves as pilots before. So what I do have to say to those that push back is that words do matter. And if we're going to continue to advance this industry to ensure that we have the safest aviation system in the world, we really need to take responsibility and ensure that we're helping to create an environment and where we're getting highly qualified and skilled pilots so that they can see themselves as part of the industry that we all love. And hopefully that answers that really long question, Abby. Thank you.
Wow. So thank you. And Camilla, Michelle, Houston, I'm honored to be on with you just for the live chat. You're very inspirational. Thank you so much. This concludes the amount of time we have for this segment of panel. And it's great to see all of the initiatives that are being implemented in your fields towards diversity and inclusion. And you're right, Camilla, words matter. And thank you all for the work that you contributed as recommendations for making language more inclusive for the aerospace system and FAA. So if I could ask you now to please turn off your cameras, mute your mics, and accept our deepest gratitude for your participation. Bye. So I'm really enjoying these discussions and learning so much, and I hope you are too. So remember, if you'd like to submit questions, please do so via the Google Doc linked in the comments section. The questions we've been getting in have just been great, and I wish we had time to answer them all. In our next segment, Angela Anderson, FAA Director of the Regulatory Support Division of Aviation Safety Office of Rulemaking, that's a mouthful, Angela, will lead the final panel to discuss how the FAA is embracing inclusivity by pushing gender language boundaries. Angela, it's great to see you. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Abby, and good morning to everyone. It is great to be here. So I would like to begin by introducing the 4 panel members and say thank you for being here. First, we have Jessica Okia. Jessica is the lead communications specialist in the executive office of the FAA's Unmanned Aircraft Systems UAS Integration Office, and she oversees 2 of the agency's UAS partnerships, the Know Before You Fly Safety Campaign and the Before You Fly mobile application. She also is a former U.S. Air Force officer and pilot, where she flew C-5 Galaxy aircraft. In addition, she is a FAA certified airline transport pilot and flight engineer, and flew for American Airlines throughout North America, the Caribbean, Central America, and Europe. Next, we have Jim Hatt. Jim supports the FAA's Commercial Space Transportation Office as the manager of the Policy and Innovation Division, Office of Strategic Management, developing and coordinating interagency and international space transportation policy. Jim serves FAA employees as the president of FAA Pride, the LGBTQ+ Employee Association, and also served for 3 years as co-chair of the Department of Defense LGBTQ+ Human Resource Organization, DoD Pride. Throughout Jim's civilian and military career, Jim has focused on building bridges and teams from diverse backgrounds and talents to ensure mission success. His personal motto is, "Diversity is more than what you see, equality means everyone." Next, we have Bonnie Dragato. Bonnie is a senior attorney in the Regulations Law Practice Group in the FAA's Office of the Chief Counsel. Bonnie's practice is primarily focused on air traffic law matters and includes advising agency leaders on the FAA's runway slot program and drone security matters. And we have Rachel Cohen. Rachel is a current junior at George Washington University in DC. She is studying human services and social justice with a minor in criminal justice. Rachel has been interning with FAA since the summer of 2021 and is currently interning with the Air Traffic Organization and focuses her time with the Federal Women's Program. So let's get started with some questions. We will be talking about how FAA is encouraging gender language boundaries. So Jessica, during the previous panel, some of the members we heard from are members of the Drone Advisory Committee, which is now called the Advanced Aviation Advisory Committee, who worked on the recommendations for gender neutral language for the drone community. Can you tell us a little more about those recommendations and how we got here?
Yes, thank you so much, Angela. This is something that I feel strongly about personally. The interest from the Drone Advisory Committee or the Advanced Aviation Advisory Committee and on this topic initially came from industry. About 2 years ago, the committee members started talking about this topic at some of the meetings. They raised it during the new business section of the meetings, and the committee members discussed how they felt gendered terms such as unmanned and airman, that have been discussed previously in this panel, were outdated and hindered recruitment at their organizations. So in February 2021, the FAA tasked the committee to provide recommendations to the FAA on gender neutral language for the drone community, and to provide recommendations on how to adopt that and how the committee members could provide leadership in their industries and their communities to help build adoption. So then in June 2021, the Drone Advisory Committee presented their recommendations on this topic to the FAA. And I'm excited to say their report went far beyond what we had asked for. It was very thorough and included detailed alternative terminology. It was had a lot of very well thought out information about why we should do this, as well as it also recommended that we should extend inclusive language, not just to the drone community, but to all of aviation. The report also, as I mentioned, had some alternative terms. It actually contained a very extensive glossary of current gender-specific terms used within aviation and the recommended words that we should replace those with, the alternative, more inclusive terms. And many of these alternative inclusive terms recommended are not new words, and they're not even new to aviation. But the report recommended that we stop using the current primary terms that are gender specific and begin using the alternative inclusive terms as the primary terms and as the words we use every day. Because as everyone has mentioned along this whole discussion, words matter. Now, for some examples, they suggested that we should use the word drone or uncrewed aircraft system in place of the gender-specific term unmanned aircraft system. And they suggested we should stop using the term cockpit and instead use flight deck. Now, flight deck is a term that is already used by many in the aerospace industry, and it is more inclusive. And there are many, many more recommendations. I encourage everyone to read through the glossary and take a look at it for themselves. After receiving the recommendation report, the FAA thoroughly reviewed the committee's recommendations. During this process, FAA leadership got together and combined this initiative started by this committee with other initiatives already in process across the agency. So the recommendations from the Drone Advisory Committee, now the Advanced Aviation Advisory Committee, were sort of a spark or a catalyst that really got us moving forward on this initiative and brought us to where we are here today. We see the recommendations from the committee as a foundation, and it's a very sturdy foundation, but it's also just the beginning of the conversation. Traditional aviation terminology has been around since the Wright brothers, and it's time we transition to more inclusive language. I'm excited to be part of this and see the aviation community work together towards inclusivity. I look forward to seeing the additional recommendations for inclusive language that come out of today's summit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for sharing that background. And what it does is it just sets the stage and gives us the context and helps us understand, again, why this is so important. And just as the Advanced Aviation Advisory Committee has started their work towards inclusion, so has commercial space. So Jim, the next set of questions are for you. Space transportation is a relatively new industry and it's really cool. Aviation started as a male-dominated industry, and so language was definitely not gender inclusive. How is the space industry language? Is the commercial space industry facing a similar challenge of changing language and changing culture? And why do you think space is ahead of some of the other industries?
Well, thank you. Those are great questions, and absolutely space is cool. I mean, it's in the news all the time, and it's a wonderful place to work. Okay, so much for the advertisement. Yeah, with space, it's relatively new. I mean, it has not been around nearly as long as aviation, and so space really started with a better handle on inclusion and was more inclusion or more inclusive culturally and with the language. It wasn't perfect. It still isn't perfect. It still started out as a male-dominated industry, but if you look back, just one example, think of Miss Wally Funk, who trained as an astronaut back in 1961, part of the Mercury 13 program, and recently went into space on Blue Origin's New Shepard rocket. So space started with a giant leap forward towards gender inclusion. Space does incorporate a few words from aviation, as has been mentioned before, like unmanned, but looking around, our language on the space side is much more inclusive gender-wise. We use astronaut, not astroman, or those things. So I think space is definitely a step forward, and I think it's because we started later after inclusive language started to be something that we really looked at.
Thank you. So with that being said, Jim, with gender inclusive language, since it is not just about changing gender descriptive words, for example, changing fireman to firefighter, which is also what Wendy Starr stated, but it also includes personal pronouns. What tools would you encourage people to use in the work environment?
Yeah, there's a few things. Again, that's a great question, and I think it applies to not just a certain segment, but I think to everybody. Identify preferred pronouns in your signature block, or for example, here on Zoom. There's no need to make people guess or feel embarrassed if they call you by the wrong pronoun for what you prefer. Be courteous so others can be courteous to you. Just identify. And like I said, this is for everybody. If we all make that move to say, hey, my personal pronouns are he, him, his, or they, their, them, it's not going to be a thing, nor will it make someone feel different if they do have it there, but will empower everybody to identify their personal pronouns, and it'll just become normal. Another one, so you asked for multiple tools. So let me give a couple other ones real quickly. Be open to questions. If you do list your pronouns and somebody asks, hey, well, why, for example, why do you use they, them, their? Don't take it as an offense. Don't take it as a challenge. Take it as an opportunity to tell your story and why that is. If they don't ask and get the real story, that is your story, they will either make something up or get a story from someone else, and it won't be your story. Another one is for everybody, again, ask questions. Be open to learning. I'm certainly ignorant, if you will, on a lot of topics. I am absolutely ignorant on brain surgery. You do not want me operating on your brain. But boy, it's something that every chance I get, I learn a little bit more about because I'm really intrigued. I will never be a brain surgeon. That's not a goal of mine. Just I'll put that out there. But ask the question in a nice way, and then listen to the answer. Somebody previously mentioned be a listener. Be a listener. Learn someone else's story. We all have a story to tell, and everybody's story is important. And also, I might add, it's amazing. And then the last one that I put out there for everybody, if you hear something, say something or speak up. We're all learners on this journey of life. And I know I catch myself saying, fireman instead of firefighter. And I'm one of those people that I'll catch myself and say, nope, I meant this. In real estate, instead of master suite, primary suite, all those sorts of things that we're learning. If you hear somebody say something that makes you feel uncomfortable, speak up. Do it in a kind way and gentle way, not in public, but say, hey, that word or phrase that you use really makes me uncomfortable. Let me suggest using this word or phrase instead, and be prepared to explain why it makes you uncomfortable. So those are the tools that I'd recommend.
Those are some great nuggets, Jim, that we can all put to practice in everyday life. And so here's your next final question. Are there other areas where inclusive language needs to be addressed?
Yes. So when we talk about inclusive, I like to think of it as more than just gender and that, but with just a slight modification, boy, we can be a whole lot more inclusive. For example, I've heard this several times in the last while. When new employees walk into the office, and then make sure that you're there to greet them or whatever. Instead of saying that, why don't we say when new employees come into the office? Because not all new employees will walk. If we have an employee with a disability that's coming in, they may not walk. So let's be inclusive in our language and look at that. Another one that is fairly easy is when we say, let's all stand for the singing of the national anthem, or let's all stand, et cetera. Why don't we say rise? Everybody rise, because again, not everybody is able to stand. So it's those little words, little things that we can start to make change and make people more comfortable.
Well, you have really given us something to think about, because before hearing that now, I really had not, made that connection. So I really do appreciate it. Your response aligns with so much that has already been saying today, the importance of words matter, and that they can also include or exclude. So thank you so much, Jim. Now, Jim has talked about some things that we can do at work and in our everyday life. Now let's move to Bonnie and hear about inclusive language from a legal perspective. Bonnie, what are some ways that FAA's counsel's office is engaging in the inclusive language movement?
Thanks, Angela, and good morning, everyone. FAA's counsel's office is actively supporting initiatives that are already underway to adopt new, more inclusive terminology. And one great example is adopting the term notice to air missions in place of notice to airmen as the meaning of NOTAM. This change recognizes both the full scope of aviation missions as well as gender inclusion. So the process for this specific change includes implementing the related policy and guidance materials. In addition, in Counsel's office, we are working across the organization to review FAA's statutory authorities and other aviation laws to identify terms that are not inclusive and that may require legislation to be changed. We're also working to assess the feasibility of certain proposed solutions for replacing terms.
So now let me ask, what are some of the challenges of implementing terminology changes from a legal perspective?
Sure, and so it does depend a bit on the context. And I think what's become sort of apparent from all of the panels today is that there really are two main focal areas for the FAA's inclusive language movement. The effort includes both enabling a workplace culture shift internally among all FAA personnel, as well as adopting inclusive language in our external regulatory oversight structure. Some of these changes present greater challenges than others, but I'll try to break it down based on these two separate goals. So changes to workplace culture in many ways from a legal perspective reflect the low-hanging fruit. Not to say that that will be easy. For internal policy affecting FAA personnel, there are no significant legal barriers to the adoption of more inclusive language. Steps can be taken in the near term and now, revisions of policy, communications, and other resources. This includes updating materials for which FAA personnel are the general audience or where changes in terminology do not create conflicts with law. I think the key ingredients for achieving inclusion in the workplace culture includes consistency in changes made across different lines of business and staff offices, as well as training and cooperation. This includes developing a willingness among personnel to learn and evolve. So while there are no significant legal barriers, one thing that can stand in our way is ourselves.
Thank you so much. So understanding that there are challenges, is this effort achievable given the various challenges?
Sure. And before I maybe get to whether it's achievable, I think the regulatory context is really the important second goal of the inclusive language movement. And so that process is a bit more complex from a legal perspective. Regulations and policy flow down from our statutory authority that's enacted by Congress. So we need to look to determine whether these existing gendered terms are established in statute or were established in FAA regulations. There are some changes that can be adopted on the agency's sole initiative, such as the NOTAM example. And once changes in rules and regulations are adopted, related changes can then be made in other materials. But certain language initiatives will depend upon changes in legislation. And while most changes would fall within FAA's authority in Title 49 of the US Code, other related aviation laws in other titles may also need to be addressed. Where legislative changes are needed, Congress would generally need to act before the FAA can adopt changes in regulation and policy. without introducing risk to our oversight activities. So we need to be deliberate and ensure consistency between legislation, regulation, and policy to preserve our ability to enforce regulations and execute our safety mission as we're initiating this change. Two examples of some of the terms that are defined in statute, which are going to be a little more challenging and likely require an act of Congress, would be terms like airman and unmanned aircraft system. This is an area where industry can really play a key role. The mobilization and coalescence around specific terms for inclusion may be a key ingredient to legislative change. When Congress does take action to propose changes, FAA will be ready to provide technical drafting assistance. And to your last question, Angela, on whether this is achievable, I mean, absolutely. Look, this is hard work, but it's not impossible, and it is certainly worthwhile, as we've heard from all of the speakers today. The FAA, including Counsel's Office, is dedicated to this effort to implement change. And while a comprehensive and deliberate approach is needed, and some due diligence is needed to ensure that we don't introduce unintended consequences, this is certainly a worthwhile mission for all of us. I'll leave you with one last thought, and that's from Justice Ginsburg, who said it best: real change, enduring change, happens one step at a time. Her legacy reflects that meaningful change doesn't happen overnight, but we persevere, and words matter.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. And I do apologize for not allowing you to finish or for coming in too early, because the part that you shared from the legal perspective was so important to give everybody that understanding of what all it will entail. Not that it can't be done, but it just will not happen overnight. So thank you so much for that perspective. And just as you just said, it reminds all of us that things are not easy to change, but the work required to make the change is so well worth it. And that's where, that's why we're here today, because we all realize how important this effort is. So now let's hear from Rachel, someone who represents the future. So Rachel, can you describe how the use of gender inclusive language has changed since you were in high school to now as a junior in college?
Sure, of course. So when I was in high school, which really wasn't that long ago, I only graduated in 2018. But gendered language wasn't something that was too widely discussed. Near the end of my high school career, I did begin to notice a movement towards including and discussing pronouns. But for the most part, it wasn't, I feel like, as normal as it is today of an introduction, my name and my pronouns. But then I was also part of my school's GSA, or Gay Straight Alliance, where we focus typically on issues surrounding the LGBTQ+ community. And within that, we would talk about gender and gendered language in general. So I had a bit more of a background on the topic than most. And for those students who really weren't aware of it in high school, I felt that they had a very negative reaction to the idea. I would hear comments of, that's just the way it is, why change it? I'm not sexist, it's just the language. And then regarding pronouns, people would make a lot of jokes about it, such as like, well, I identify as a strawberry, so call me a strawberry now, which was just not appropriate. But overall, there was a lot of pushback. However, I'm really glad that when I came to college, it was completely different. Gendered language is something that I have talked about a lot, not only in my classes, but with my friends as well. I've seen this a lot in my classes because I take a lot of sociology-based classes, and we discuss the makeup of society, patriarchal influences, challenges of being a woman in society, just as some examples. And in there, we've then discussed the gendered language and some of those difficulties that come with it. And so I've seen a lot of professors and students start to move away from very gendered terms, such as you guys, to more phrases that are going to include everyone, such as group, class, all. So overall, it's been a very positive change that I've seen. And people in general are really moving away from that binary language. And on the topic then of pronouns in the binary language, I feel that a lot of people have begun to make it part of the normal introduction. I know when my professors send out introduction forms, they always ask name, pronouns, or if it's a small enough class, we'll go around and say names and pronouns. And I think that's been a really great change. And this has been something that I personally haven't had too much to struggle with in this change, because the way I always viewed it is that if somebody had earned a PhD and wants to be addressed by doctor, you do that. So if somebody identifies as non-binary and want to be called by they, them pronouns, you do that. And I think a lot of students, specifically at George Washington University, have the same mindset as that, as well as many other college students in America.
Thank you so much, Rachel. So when you think about what you have experienced in terms of the changes with gender inclusive language over the past couple of years, what work have you participated in to help move forward the use of inclusive language?
Yeah, so as you said in my bio introduction, I started interning with the FAA over the summer. And so in that, I was part of the MSI program, which is Minority Serving Institution program. And part of that program then includes working on a cohort project. And so I was assigned to the Gender Neutral Initiative cohort project. So I got to work with 5 other fantastic interns who were working with various departments. And we were helping ACR and the Federal Women's Program move towards the gender neutral initiative that they wanted. And so we were kind of helping get this off the ground, where we were completing an environmental scan of policies, procedures, and documents from all various lines of businesses during the summer. And then we created a communication and implementation plan, as well as some suggestions taking inspiration from the Joint Advisory Committee. And so our plan included a gender neutral task force that was made up of various lines of businesses and keeping employees in the loop of what was happening via social media and email. But I think the coolest part now has been continuing on with FAA in the fall, where I am now part of the action group that meets weekly to discuss really the next steps to turn all of our ideas and suggestions into actual policy, and are even part of the group that helped plan today's summit. And so it's been a really great journey, and it's so great to be part of something that's really making change that needs to happen.
Well, Rachel, you have experienced quite a bit in such a short life. And so my last question for you is, how do you see a business handling inclusive language, and how will that impact your decision to work at that company?
Yeah, so I definitely have experienced quite a bit. And for somebody who's going to be entering the workforce in just a year or two, which is kind of crazy to me, I am definitely starting to figure out where I want to be and what I want a company to represent. And so I see so far a lot of companies, so far when I've been applying to various internships and just going to career fairs, have been moving towards a positive manner regarding gendered language. Most of this, I would say, first comes in a few different movements. One being the idea of using pronouns and everybody representing who they want to be. And I think that's really the first step for a lot, because it's one small thing that you can change. Then I think a lot of organizations, once they're comfortable with that, are starting to move to something that, such as the FAA is doing, where we're looking at all of the language that is used on an everyday basis and seeing if it is holding any patriarchal views or excluding people or setting up a specific standard of participants that it shouldn't be. And so I think a lot are starting to move to that. And specifically when it comes to applying to an internship or a job for me, I do really care a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and gendered language falls right underneath that as well. And part of that has come from all the work that I've been doing, as I said in my last question and answer, that a lot of that work has shown me the importance of it. But then people in my everyday life too, I want my friends to be able to be who they are. And I hope that in general, future employers recognize that. And so I really want to know that the company that I'm working for is going to care about each of its employees and make a safe space for everybody, because I'm not the only one there. There's so many others, and so many others with such diverse backgrounds that I think we really need to honor. So it's going to be something that I look for in businesses going forward. And I don't think I'm the only one with that.
Well, that was my last question, but it is just so clear that everyone here on the panel has talked about how FAA has begun to embrace inclusivity. We've all talked about being intentional, about being open, and so that we can share our story and our experiences. It's something that we are happy to see that what we've done so far as an agency, and we know that this is just the beginning. So again, I just want to say thank you to everyone for your time. Thank you for sharing the information that you have shared. And then back over to Abby for questions from the audience.
Yeah, thank you, Angela. I agree. It was a wonderful panel and just amazing learning that continues to happen. So question number one, and so this can go to anybody that wants to answer it. Juan asks, how will the proposed inclusive language changes improve aviation safety? And I guess I would say aerospace safety, since we've got Jim representing commercial space too. So Jess or Jim, you want to take a?
I'd be happy to start. Thank you. I think that the biggest answer to that question is inclusive language builds an inclusive community, and it brings everyone to the table. And a lot of safety problems and safety challenges are complicated. And the more viewpoints and the more help we have to look at these challenges, look at these issues, and to work together, and the more we all feel accepted and welcome, and we're able to give our best and bring our best work and our best selves to the job, the better the solutions we're going to be able to come together with as a team. So my thing is that I think that several panel members today have talked about be curious, talked about welcoming, and talked about how if you bring your authentic self and feeling safe to do so in an inclusive environment is really important. And the more voices we get at the table, the better the solutions we'll get to these big challenges we have going forward to make aerospace system, the aerospace system in the United States and around the world as safe as possible.
Awesome. Anyone want to jump in, or did Jess provide it?
Ditto.
Okay, great. So this next question is for Rachel. And it comes from Jeremy, who asks, as someone entering the workforce, why is inclusive language important to you?
Sure. So I think part of the reason that it has become so important to me is, first of all, with the work that I've been doing with FAA, I've really seen how language can greatly affect individuals. And I know from my own life that I have friends who are non-binary. I have relatives and relatives of my friends that I know that, might not always fall into the categories of woman or man. And I want them to feel represented as well. And so for me, it's really about the larger picture. I might not be somebody who identifies not within the binary, but that doesn't mean there's somebody who isn't. And I think that if I can help in any way to make those individuals feel included, that I should be doing my part. And so if that's working with FAA and moving towards a more inclusive language that then starts to set off a chain reaction, I think that's a great opportunity. And I think in general, it really shows that an organization cares about its employees. And that is truly important to me, because I don't want to be working all this time and not feel appreciated, for instance. And I think one way to show appreciation is through allowing you to be who you are. And I think that's very important to me. And that's why I value inclusive language.
Thank you. So this next question is for you, Bonnie. Neil asks, are there any special considerations or requirements from an international perspective when it comes to inclusive language? What do you think, Council?
So the International Civil Aviation Organization, or better known amongst the aviation crowd as ICAO, has highlighted gender equality and the participation of women in the workplace as a matter of importance. In March of this year, ICAO adopted a declaration on improving gender representation at ICAO. And the declaration commits to protect ICAO policies, standards, and official documents from gender discriminatory language. As an example of this commitment, ICAO now refers to remotely piloted aircraft systems, or RPAS, instead of unmanned aircraft systems. And also, ICAO no longer defines the acronym NOTAM as Notice to Airmen, but instead uses NOTAM as a noun. These modifications are slowly making their way through updates in the ICAO annexes, guidance materials, and other documents. From FAA's perspective, replacing gender-based terms with new inclusive terminology is in line with ICAO to date. It's important to note that while the United States is usually required to notify ICAO when we are unable to comply with their standards, which is a process referred to as filing a difference at ICAO, general terminology used by ICAO is not considered to be a standard. So any distinctions in terminology between the FAA and ICAO, such as notice to air mission versus NOTAM, are not expected to require the FAA to file a difference.
Cool.
Good news, I think.
That's very interesting. Had no idea. It was a great question from Neil. So we've heard a lot during the last 2 hours about what we can do to move the FAA and the aerospace community toward a more inclusive language and help build a stronger future. Monique specifically wanted to hear from Jim and Jessica about why, kind of is the same question that was asked of Rachel earlier. Why is inclusive language important to each of you? Jim, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. And the inclusive language, I think, is really important. And it's not just important to me, but I think it's important for everybody, because as we move to inclusivity in language, that makes everybody feel less self-conscious and more included. I mean, inclusive, included, all those things. And if I feel included and I feel seen, and all the people feel that way, they belong to the group, that's an environment where great ideas can flourish. And nobody needs to feel, ooh, I have to be quiet because, and I had this with one employee, a new employee, they wanted to become a member of FAA Pride, but they didn't want to let the people at work know that they were a member of Pride, because that would out them, and they didn't know how the environment would treat them, i.e. their supervisor, if that would be a negative or not. And those are the kind of things that if we have inclusive language and everybody is using that inclusive language, I'm going to be comfortable. And yes, I am part of the LGBTQ, and I feel absolutely great about bringing my ideas. I can be, as has been mentioned before, I can bring my true self. I can be myself, and once I'm free of having to hide and do all these things, boy, my creativity can be absolutely put into work and come up with those ideas to solve problems and make aerospace the safest in the world.
Thank you, Jim. Jess?
Thank you, Abby. And I totally agree with everything that Jim said. And I also would like to add to it and start sort of at the beginning of my journey. And I began to learn to fly 3 decades ago. A lot has changed during that time, but a lot has stayed the same. I flew in the United States Air Force Reserves, and I flew for a Part 121 air carrier. And most of that time, as during my professional flying career, I was the only diverse member of my crew on the flight deck. And there were times when this was very challenging, and there were times when the environment was less than inclusive. Sometimes I did not really feel welcome. So, that is something that I think we need to change, and it's time now that it changes. So now I'm very hopeful. I'm really excited that this change is happening, and I'm excited to be part of it. I think it is the right time for the aviation and aerospace communities to make this change, to move toward inclusive language and to move away from exclusive language and gendered terms. And I think the future of aviation really depends on it. You know, we want the best and brightest, ensuring the aircraft of tomorrow are safe, helping us integrate new operations into our national airspace system, and helping us reach for the stars. I'm thankful and appreciative that this is happening now. And looking back to when I was a new co-pilot, I never would have imagined this change possible during my career. But here it is, and it's happening. And I'm excited to see FAA and the community starting to move towards inclusive terms. You know, the example of changing notices to airmen to notices to air missions is, you know, really very welcome, long overdue, and really wonderful. I'm happy that the next generation of aerospace professionals and enthusiasts will be joining a more inclusive, welcoming community. And I hope it encourages more diverse individuals to join the aerospace community. And I hope it encourages more young women and girls who, like me, looked towards the skies and were interested in aviation careers and are interested in aviation careers today to pursue their dreams, because words do matter. So that's why it's important to me. Thank you, Abby.
Thank you. It harkened me back to the control room, hearing your story, and yeah, pretty amazing. So another question, but I think it goes to all of you, because it's a really great question that two people asked. Richard and Cole both put basically this question in the chat. What do we do about individuals who don't want to be inclusive? So I'd like to hear from the whole panel, and I will leave it up to, well, Bonnie, can you kick us off? Again, what do we do about individuals who do not want to be inclusive? How do we handle that?
Oh, it won't be easy. I think, you know, this effort is so important for so many reasons. And to me, I think this is where education and training and working on that workplace culture a little bit every single day in all of our interactions, our communications, our written work product, and not just the external facing context, but the internal, I think, is key here. Are all things that are going to be critical. And we do, you know, one of the panels earlier, I think, talked about needing a top-down approach within the organization, right? And I think we're seeing today that we do have that top-down support from our leadership at FAA, that this is a priority mission that we are committed to here. And I think, you know, having that trickle down and having more of these opportunities for folks to engage, I think, will be really key to kind of pushing that culture forward little by little.
Thank you. Let's go to Rachel next.
Sure. I have to say, I have to reiterate everything that Bonnie said. I believe that education is really our biggest tool, because there's so much that you might not understand. And if you don't understand it and no one explains why, it's not going to solve anything. So I really think that education is important. And then I think also having summits like this of explaining the importance of it, explaining the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how it really can change. And then I would also encourage people to talk to some of their coworkers. Maybe they don't know something about their coworkers that relates to their diverse background, and their coworkers can explain, you know, as for instance, I'll use myself, I'm Jewish, and with the rise of anti-Semitic hate that has happened in the country, I like to explain to people, you know, I'm Jewish and this is why it matters that I be seen as that. And I think having a moment like that with your coworkers is also a great way to learn about why inclusion is so important.
Thank you. Jessica?
Sure, thank you. I think the first thing we need to acknowledge is that change can be difficult for people. And, also at the same time, remember that change is inevitable. And a couple things, I know, Jim said earlier to speak up when you hear things or see things that are not inclusive. I think that we need to continue to do that. And we need to do that because in some cases, some people may not even understand they're not being inclusive, and it may not be intentional. So we need to speak up and help explain why things are important. And for the people that are naysayers and don't think this change is important, again, speaking up and telling them why it's important, and telling them why it's important to us, to me as an individual, to you, Abby, to Jim, to Bonnie, to Rachel. Make it personal, let them understand, help them learn why this is important to people around them, not to just a, mass community that they may not, identify with as an individual, but to tell them why it matters to you and to me.
Thank you. Jim, you're the ringer.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I agree with everything. And Jessica, I think that word, and this is what I had written down when you first asked this question, is relationship. It really comes down to relationship. And I've mentioned this several times to people. And earlier today, in one of the questions I mentioned, it's a story. It's your story. And as we talk with people, it's not really about those people over there or them or, that. It's about me. And so I think that's really important. And coming up in the LGBTQ community, I started out in the Air Force as a commissioned officer 36 years ago. And it was even before Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And, there were a lot of, gay this and homosexual that, and it was very negative until somebody realized, oh, wait, you are. Oh, well, you're just like us. You don't have a third eye, or you don't have whatever. We've known you all what's the big deal? And I think that's really part of it. It's that relationship, and as we build relationships, it becomes about us, and we can tell that story. So I encourage people to exactly do that. Speak up, tell their story, let people know, hey, this is why this matters to me.
Thank you. Thank you. And to the people in our audience that have submitted questions, thank you so much. There is no way that we could get to all of them, but the questions and comments help us in as we move forward on this journey towards really crafting inclusive language. I want to thank all of our panelists again. Your insight has added so much value to this discussion about gender neutral and inclusive language. So if you would please turn your cameras off and mute your mics, we're going to prepare to close out. This has been just an excellent discussion, and a big thanks to all of our panelists today. Because words matter, I'd really like to now turn it over to Harnetta Williams, our Deputy Assistant Administrator for the Office of Civil Rights, for closing remarks. Harnetta? Harnetta? She's been having some trouble with her computer. There we go. Okay, Harnetta.
Did that work?
I got it. All right.
So thank you, Abigail, and to all who participated in the summit today, in front of the camera and behind the scenes. Thank you, Deputy Administrator Mims, for your unwavering support and strong commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the aerospace industry and at the FAA. We believe everyone deserves to feel like they have a place in the workplace, and as such, The FAA is committed to creating a work environment that is welcoming and free of biases. An essential element of an inclusive work environment is the use of gender inclusive language. As we work to hire the next generation of talent into the agency and encourage the next generation to join the aerospace community, we must ensure we create a foundation for a successful future by updating our language used in all of our many regulatory guidances, the procedures, practices, and what we heard today in our daily interactions with each other is a critical step toward making equality a reality for all within the FAA and the aerospace industry. The FAA will continue to uphold the highest standards for aerospace safety and innovation while promoting a welcoming environment for all. Thank you to all who attended today's summit. As Administrator Dixon says, this is not the end, but simply a continuation of our journey to change the landscape of the aerospace industry by making diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility a standard practice when carrying out every aspect of our mission. Today, we heard varying perspectives and learned why this is such an important topic to all of us. We want to hear from you. If you have any additional comments or questions or recommendations on how the agency might incorporate gender neutral and inclusive language moving forward, we ask that you would submit those no later than November 30th at the DEIA@FAA.gov website. Again, DEIA@FAA.gov. Thank you for listening. Thank you for participating, and stay safe. Abby, I turn it back to you.
Thank you, Harnetta. And again, thank you to everybody who has tuned in, to our wonderful panelists and moderators. And I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much, and take care.